Hi, I'm Geraint Wyn Davies, and I'm in good company with Martha Henry. Hi, Martha.
Hi. Hi, Peter.
So, first of all, I love the story about Margaret and Claire.
Oh, yes.
Could you tell us a little about Margaret and Claire?
When I was a little girl, I was living with my grandparents because my mother was a musician, and she was a single parent, and she earned her money by playing mostly accordion. She would play anything with keys. And she had two accordions of her own, a black one and a gold one. The gold one was very romantic. And she would work at night. And when I was little, I was too young to stay alone. And so she took me to my grandparents, which was about an hour and a half's drive away from Detroit, where we lived. And I ended up living there until I was 14, for 9 years. And my mother obviously would come up whenever she could, and I would go and stay with her in the summers when I didn't have to be in school. But the rest of the time, I lived in a little town called Greenville, Michigan. Well, in this house with my grandparents, they had a trunk in the dining room. And in the trunk, my grandmother kept all the things that her children had ever done, really. All the things they had brought home, drawings, books, everything. And she used to let me play in that trunk and ruffle through it. And one day, way down in the bottom of it, I found what I didn't know was then a script. This turned out to be from my uncle, my mother's brother, who had gone to Northwestern University to study drama. He wanted to be a lighting designer. He never did. He came back home and he was a farmer all his life. But for this brief period of time, he went to Northwestern University and he brought back some scripts. And this script, I had never seen a script before. I didn't even know that was what it was called. But I pulled it out and opened it. I was probably about 5.5, maybe 6. And I saw in the credits that there was a person called Claire, and there was another person called perhaps Margaret. And there was a line, a sentence, which I could read, which sounded to me as if Claire was talking. And then Margaret was talking back to Claire. And I read this with fascination. And I read through the whole script. And at the end, I saw that Claire had come out on top. Margaret was the mean one, and Claire was the one who was trying to make the situation better. And Claire won in the end. Well, this is, when you're 5 or 6, this is quite moving. And I began to realize I would put the script back in the bottom of the trunk. I was allowed to look at anything in there, but for some reason, this script became my secret. Mm-hmm. And so my grandmother didn't know I was reading this for quite some time. And eventually, I pulled it out and I realized that I could be either Margaret or Claire. I knew that there was some place I could go where I could be this person. And then I wouldn't have to be me. Because my parents were getting a divorce. I was no longer living with my parents. I was living with my grandparents, whom I loved, and they were wonderful. And I can't say I had a hard life, but I missed my mother and my dad. And so obviously, without knowing what I was doing, I was looking for some kind of reasoning, some kind of stability, some kind of answer to why I was where I was and who I was. And suddenly there was Margaret and Claire, and I could pick. I didn't realize then that, no, you can't pick, but I could pick whether I wanted to be Claire, who came out on top, or Margaret, who learned her lesson. Eventually, I realized you have to be both. You
Right.
have to be, yes, one or the other.
But you then went to Carnegie Tech.
Yes, I did.
And why did you choose Carnegie Tech?
I chose Carnegie Tech because when my mother and I were looking at colleges, I was looking for a drama program in a safe school, a school where I was terribly shy. And I was looking for a school where I would feel protected. But at the same time, I was looking for a drama program, and I didn't really know how to find one. But at Carnegie Tech, they auditioned people, whereas the other colleges that I was looking at did not. I looked at Bennington, I looked at a college in Illinois, these were all girls' schools, and Carnegie Tech, of course, was not a girls' school, but my high school had been all girls. And so a lot of the girls that I knew in high school were going off to Bryn Mawr and Vassar and, those places. And I didn't want that, nor probably could I have gotten in. But I was looking for something that had a viable arts program. And when I came across Carnegie Tech, which is now Carnegie Mellon, the fact that they were auditioning actors for their drama program said to me, even at that point, stupid as I was, I thought, well, they must care about the quality of the actors that they're accepting. So I auditioned for Carnegie Tech and I got in.
And was it a 3 or 4 year program?
4 years.
Okay.
It was a complete university program.
Well, that's cool. And so in that time, how were you as a student at school?
It kind of depended on what I was taking. I was fine. I got good marks. I got good enough marks, to get through. I certainly wasn't one of their geniuses by any means, but I did well enough so that when this was in high school now, when I decided that I was going to take part in Summerstock, George C. Scott, I don't know if you remember George C. Scott, but
of course I do.
George C. Scott was a Detroit guy. His father ran Scott Towels. And George happened to be associated with a small summer theater called Willoway Playhouse, where he produced and directed and acted in a number of shows. He was 27 at the time, and I would have been 17. So he would have started even before that, because I think I was a member of Willoway when I was 14.
Whoa. And
he was around then. And the first thing that I was in at Willoway was a play by Faye Garson Kanan called Goodbye, My Fancy. And I played George C. Scott's daughter. Mm. And I thought I had seen wonderful actors before. There were some really, really fine Detroit actors that took part at Willoway, but I had never seen an actor like this. This was something on another level entirely. And I was mesmerized by him and probably fell a little bit in love with him at the same time.
And he was only in his 20s.
Yeah. Oh, I know. Yes. Wow. And I played Dora, the maid, in Night Must Fall. And he played Danny, the murderer.
Yes. That's a great play, That's a really good play, I think.
Yes,
Edmund Williams wrote some nice plays.
Yeah. Yes, it is. It's a wonderful play. Kind of potboiler, but melodrama. But yeah, it's fantastic. And he also directed a play that I was in called Chris du Monde, which was a play about the Mardi Gras in New Orleans, because he had a close friend who was from New Orleans and had written this play. And he put it on at Willoway. He was extraordinary. He had a girlfriend who was very rich, and she put the money up for these shows that he wanted to do. And it was fantastic. He was a wonderful director. And I was, of course, terrified at the same time as being slightly in love with him.
National Theatre School, Powys Thomas, one of the great men of the theatre, I thought, here. He died. I was going to go to the theatre school in Vancouver, and I was just about to go out there, and Powys passed away. So I never went. That's why I didn't go to theatre school, because Powys died, and then I just hit the streets. But yeah, Powys was your first theatre school man. Oh, sorry, second after Carnegie Tech.
Yes, this was after Carnegie Tech. I went home and after Carnegie Tech, and because in the summers I had gone to Leamington, Ontario, to do Summerstock there, and this was partly because George was there. Scott did Summerstock in Leamington. And it was run and directed by a man named Larry Johnson, who was a wonderful director and a friend of George's. And they invited me to come there and be their kind of resident ingenue. Yeah.
It was great. So during Leamington then, would you all come to Stratford and see the festival?
Oh, well, I came, but not with them. No, okay. I always came with my mother.
All right.
Or my drama group in school. My drama teacher had a station wagon. You remember station wagon?
Oh, of course.
And she would load all us girls into the back of the station wagon and drive us up to Stratford. And I would take my complete works of Shakespeare with me. And I remember watching Christopher Plummer's Hamlet. And on the way home, all the other girls sat in the seats, and I sat on the floor in the very back of the station wagon, poring over Hamlet, trying to figure out how he did that, because he made it sound like talking. And I had never seen an actor play Shakespeare before. I hadn't seen very many actors play Shakespeare. I had never seen one before play Shakespeare where it sounded as if he was actually talking. And I was riveted trying to figure out how he did that. I'm still riveted trying to figure out.
And we're all trying to do what Chris did
Yeah.
back then. And so at that time, did you say, okay, I want to work there?
Oh, yes. I was dying to work there, but I knew I never could. It was way, 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 way beyond me and beyond my capabilities. But I moved to Canada because the country had created this theater, the Stratford Festival. There was nothing like that in the United States. There was Arena Stage in Washington, and there was the theater in Dallas. I forget what it was called now.
The Alley?
The Alley, yes, that's right, run by Nina Vance. And those were the only two at that point, the only two repertory theaters in the United States. There was no Milwaukee. Milwaukee came after Stratford, as you know. Sure. All those other theaters blossomed after that time. But at that time, the Stratford Festival was just glorious. I mean, it was unimaginable. I'd never seen a place like that. And I thought, that country can produce that festival. That's the country I want to live in. Okay. And I moved here.
So many incredible performances here over the past, and 61 was what was your first year here?
62.
That's 58 years.
Yeah, that's a long
Holy
time.
moly. Okay. When did you direct your first play? When did first play you directed?
The first play I ever directed was here at the Stratford Festival. It was a one-man show called Brief Lives, starring Douglas Rain. And I was married to Douglas Rain, and Robin Phillips, who was running the festival, asked me to direct it. I suspected later on it was because no one else dared deal with Douglas. Okay. He was a singular actor, as you know. and had extremely high standards. And I think everybody was a little afraid of him. And so I had the wit to know enough not to direct him. What I did was try to, if I can use a curling analogy, I tried to clear the ice for him so that he could go where he needed to go. And so I did all the stuff I'd never done before. I didn't do, but I collaborated with the lighting designer, with the set designer, with the costume designer, with publicity, with music. I loved being in on the music, all the other aspects to a show that I had never been able to meddle in before, but of course I'd always had opinions on, including the publicity. This was the first time I was able to say, this was back in the 70s. And I had never before been able to say to a photographer, no, you don't have me looking up into the lights because that has nothing to do with this scene or even with this play. Because the photographers always used to say, you have to look up and get the light in your eyes or they won't print the picture. This was probably true, but it used to drive me crazy. And so finally, with Douglas, I was able to say, no, he doesn't have to look up into the lights. Just take a picture of him cooking his chicken livers, which was what he did on stage. And I found that extremely gratifying.
So did you get the bug then for directing?
Well, I discovered that there were things about it that I liked, like being able to say, no, he doesn't look up into the lights, and people would listen to me. And I could say, let's try a little bit of this here. I'm not quite seeing him in the corner. And the lighting designer then would lift the lights at that particular place. And I would say, I think we need a little more music here. Or, no, I don't want music underlying that speech. And they would take it away. Mm-hmm. I mean, they might argue from time to time, and I was always open to an argument. But finally, I had the last word. Well, that's very satisfying for a little girl, who pulled a script out of her trunk when she was 5 years old and was trying to find some form of discipline to her life.
Now, did you find that informed your acting differently? After you finished that, were you performing that summer?
Yes, I think so, although I don't really remember.
Did that change the way you viewed tackling scripts or the way you worked with the director after that? Or
yes, enormously. I realized as I directed that directors are human beings and are fallible. And I was much, much easier on directors after that. I used to be very often a pill in rehearsals. I never realized it at the time. But after I was directing, I realized that it's no good for a director to have an actor fight them. It just destroys the whole atmosphere. It destroys everything that's going on. And I became much more agreeable, much more productive in rehearsals. I became a nicer actor.
That actually is one of my favorite things that has come out of time is that you can actually become friends and respected colleagues, when it wasn't always necessarily that way.
Well, I always loved you on stage. And so I was thrilled when we got to do Measure for Measure. But Measure for Measure is, of course, a very, very difficult play. And I don't wonder that we had some elbows, as you say, going at that. So before we started Mother Courage, you played the cook in Mother Courage. We sat down and had dinner, and we had a good chat about this. And I think I said, I don't mind if you don't like something that's going on, but for heaven's sake, tell me privately. Exactly. Don't do it in front of the company. Exactly. And you agreed. You said, okay. And to my memory, we never had one single problem with Mother
Yep.
Courage. I thought what you did was phenomenal all the way through. You were a delight to work with. You never gave me an instant's trouble, or if you did it with a joke or a laugh, which I absolutely understood. And it was great. I have to say, it was wonderful.
Less difficult play. I mean, it's not, wait, sorry, I shouldn't, no, it's not, but Measure is, I want to ask you about that, actually. So you had incredible success with your productions of Measure for Measure as an actress. How is it directing that piece, which you were so associated with as a player, to go in and direct it? How is that? How does that work?
Well, that was odd because the production I was in had been directed by Robin Phillips, right. And it was a singular and original production, which will never be repeated. And here I was doing Measure for Measure, and of course the things that stuck out in my mind from that production were things that Robin had done. And I got it into my head that I couldn't do any of those things because Robin had done them. And I think now that was probably a mistake. I don't mean that I should have copied him, but there were certain areas of it that I simply blocked because he had done them. And I didn't want to be copying him, not only from an audience's point of view, but from my point of view. I didn't want to be just hanging on his coattails, you know? So there were things that I ignored that I think I should not have ignored, and places where I wanted to go that I probably should have eased up on. So that was a kind of lesson for me. I'm not sure that one should be directing shows that were so incredibly successful. Maybe if you've been in one that you think hasn't quite worked, mm-hmm. and you have a different take on it, that's a good time then to take on the directing of a show you've been in.
Do you know, I was thinking, how about playing the same part again and again? I've only done it once, and it just was this last year as Falstaff in Merry Wives. It's the first time I've ever played the same part again. And I was balking at it because I thought, I don't want to. I ended up enjoying it because it was a different group of people and a different director and 10 years later or whatever. But how have you done it quite a lot?
I've done it a fair bit, yes. I've played Titania twice. I've played Helena and All's Well twice. I've done it a fair bit. And I've played Elizabeth Proctor 3 times in The Crucible. Each time it seemed completely new to me. Each time I found things I had never found before because, as you say, the actors were different, the director was different. Alan Scarf was one of the directors. He was a wonderful director. And I enjoyed it every single time. It was a part that suited me. It fit me. I could be flexible inside it. And it was, I've also directed The Crucible. And that was fine too. I had no problem directing that one.
How do you feel about the American classics?
Well, I love them, of course, and I feel very free in them. When we were doing All My Sons, I realized that this was the first play I'd done in a long time that I was actually alive in the period when it was set. Mm-hmm. And that was very freeing for me. I could say things like, no, there were no plastic bags. I knew what that time was like. I lived in it. And so I found that, I think the most exciting things about directing are when you find that kind of freedom. You know, you feel you're in a world that you inhabit, that you know instinctively and with preparation, and that you can really go anywhere. I felt like that when I was directing Chekhov's Three Sisters. Mm-hmm. That, again, was a play that I had been in twice before. And I had been in wonderful productions, but each of the parts I played Olga and I played Irina I played Masha. And I guess I played Irina too, come to think of it. But by the time I got to direct it, I realized it was a play I knew extremely well. And because there are so many different adaptations and so many different scripts, I was never using exactly the same script each time. And I chose a script that I had never worked on before. And it was divine. I didn't have to think. I could just see what was happening, what was going on, where it needed to go. And things popped into my mind all the time about it. I didn't know where they had come from, but they obviously came from the fact that this play had been in my body for over 20 years. Right. And you don't get that kind of familiarity really any other way, which is why the Stratford Festival is such a glorious place to work. You get to work on all these fantastic plays, sometimes over and over again.
And with a company, there's a question, do you find it an advantage or a disadvantage to know your fellow players so well?
Oh, obviously a huge advantage.
Yes.
Huge, enormous. Sometimes you know actors so well because you've played with them on stage, you can see what they're doing even before they do it. And that's very helpful as a director.
And how do you feel about the situation of the Stratford Festival now? What do you think about it? Because you've worked with so many of the younger actors in the last few years with the Birmingham Conservatory.
Yeah.
How do you feel of this?
I think the Conservatory is a wonderful thing. And it, especially for talented young actors who have never done Shakespeare or have very little experience with classical plays, which is most of them, because nowadays theaters simply can't afford to do these big shows. And so it gives them 1 or 2, it's a 2-year program if they want to stay. It gives them 1 or 2 years to really steep themselves in Shakespeare, in verse, to learn about iambic pentameter and how Shakespeare uses it, to learn about the glory of these stories and the excitement of playing these fantastic parts. And that it's not stuffy literary stuff. It's written for the actor, isn't it? It's written for life and for blood and for passion and for you owe me money.
Yes, you owe me money.
Yes, it's written for those phenomenal things. And when you've done a fair bit of Shakespeare and you're away from it for a long time, I realize that I get hungry to come back and do it, because there is no other playwright, with the possible exception of Chekhov, that gives you back so much.
What would you say to our audience? What would you say to the people now? Particularly, we're in this very, very strange period of time. It will change back to something. It won't be exactly what it was, but what do you say from one of our great assets to the festival? What do you say to an audience for the future of the festival?
Well, I think the greatest asset here is our artistic director, Anthony Cimolino, and our company of actors. You don't find this kind of strength really anywhere else, I don't think, in the world.
Martha, anything else? Anything that you'd like to say?
I don't think so, except that we are in the grandest profession in the world.
You're
the
right.
Most exciting, the most terrifying, the most delightful, the most bewildering in the world.
And you know what? We're so lucky to have each other. And when we have each other, that's one of the most important things for me.
Yeah.
So it's great. Well, thank you, Martha.
Thank you, Ger. You're a wonderful host.
Oh, I don't know about, but it's great. I love it when trying to come up with a name, and In Good Company just sounded like the right thing to say, because that's what we are. That's what we get to do with each other. I'm privileged to spend time with you. Thank you.
Thank you.